Senator Hanson-Young.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to speak to these amendments moved by the government. I've obviously got an awful lot of questions for the minister as well in relation to how on earth the government thinks it is appropriate to hold children as hostages in order to change fundamental pieces of legislation to grant the minister just simply more power for himself. I must say, I've had many debates in this place over asylum seeker and refugee policy, many of them, and many of them are pretty undignified. But I must say I've never seen anything as so appalling and abusive as we have seen in this place tonight. We heard from Senator Muir that he felt like he was in such a difficult position to vote between a bad and a terrible bill because he was told that if he didn't do what the government wanted, the children would get it. He was told the only way to get these children out of detention was to pass this bill and this package. Now, I have been saying for a number of weeks now that the minister was using children in detention as hostages. It was a figure of speech until tonight. Tonight we saw children on Christmas Island handed a phone number of the minister to call, handed a phone number of the Senator, Senator Muir. They were asked to call that number and beg that senator to let them out. Now, if that isn't treating children as hostages, what is it? And this minister has become one of the most sociopathic people in this country. I want to give you the definition of a sociopath. It's characterised by a lack of regard for the moral or legal standards of society, a master deceiver and manipulator, someone who will do whatever it takes to get what he wants with no regard for consequences. Minister Morrison is a sociopath who has just held children as hostages in order to grab the power he wants in this place tonight. I do not blame Senator Muir. I don't blame any of the members on this crossbench. I don't even blame a number of the backbenchers of the Liberal National Party, who I know are appalled at where this government's policy is going. But I do as hell blame Minister Morrison and Tony Abbott. They have been desperate for months to get a win on this issue. They have done everything they could do to make it a hard moral choice for people in this place. And what is in this bill is not just temporary protection visas, is not just a new visa created to allow people to work. We know there are 7 schedules in this piece of legislation, and the majority of them do exactly the opposite of helping children and their families resettle properly in this country. Minister Morrison has held children in detention for months that he could have released at any time. The conditions inside the detention centre on Christmas Island are appalling. Children have been abused. They have been raped. Their parents have been raped. And I'm not exaggerating. This is what the evidence has shown. Why didn't he get the children out when they started to be abused? Why didn't he let the children out when they called and wrote and begged him to let them go to school 6 months ago? Why didn't he let them out when the Human Rights Commission said it was the most disgraceful conditions children should ever be held in? Why didn't he let them out then? Because he was waiting for his prime time to use them as bargaining chips, to use them as pawns in his political play to get legislation that he wanted through this place that previously had no support in this chamber. The amendments today moved by the minister to this legislation do not improve the substance of this bill. The amendments put forward in this piece of legislation don't make any real difference to the actual use of those CHEVs or those TPVs, despite what the crossbench has been told. There is no way that somebody can honestly believe that there is a pathway to permanency for any of the people in this 30,000 caseload backlog. I want to address the backlog issue because one of the men responsible for this backlog is the very same man who has now drafted, negotiated this dirty hostage situation this week, and his name is Paris Aristotle. We have a backlog of 30,000 asylum seekers in this country because Paris Aristotle told Prime Minister Gillard that it would be a good idea to freeze the applications of asylum seekers when they arrive here. He told the Prime Minister at the time, Prime Minister Gillard, that that is how you stop the boats. Stop processing people's claims, introduce something called the no advantage rule, which would mean that people wouldn't have their claims processed for 5 or 6 years or so. They wouldn't even put a figure on it. So boats didn't stop. They kept coming, despite the fact that right in this place we had a debate about that exact piece of legislation that allowed for all of those recommendations that Paris Aristotle and Angus Houston wanted. And we had a late-night debate very similar to what is going on here. I was standing right there. That legislation went through, the freeze occurred, the boats didn't stop, but boy oh boy, the backlog built up. Now in 2014, 2 years later, the very same person who created the policy that created this problem is now in our crossbenchers' offices this week telling them, you have to do something to get these children off Christmas Island. You've got to do something to change the laws so that the minister can fast-track their applications. And please, at least give them temporary protection visas, so they've got no hope of really putting down roots to rebuild their families in the country that they deserve to get permanent protection in. The very same person set these 30,000 asylum seekers and refugees up to fail from day one. It is appalling. And I want to put it on the record today that I was appalled at Senator Xenophon's speech yesterday. The praise for Paris Aristotle, who does not represent the refugee sector in this country, has no authority in this country, is a ministerial advisor. And he has negotiated a hostage situation together, hand in hand with Scott Morrison tonight. I want those kids off Christmas Island. I want the kids off Nauru. I want the people out of detention in Manus Island. But I do not believe that setting 30,000 people up to fail, giving them false hope that they will get their refugee claims assessed fairly, which they won't, because Schedule 4 and 5 scrap the ability to ever have their claims assessed fairly. Pretend that somehow there is a pathway to permanency when we know the minister has said himself it's going to be a very high bar to get there and good luck to them, quote unquote. These people are being sold false hope. And who did the final deal but a distraught, broken, abused child on Christmas Island down the telephone to a compassionate senator who wanted to do the right thing?
Shame.
He hasn't just used children as a bargaining chip, this minister. That he has sold them a false dream once more. We know that when you strip away the ability to have a genuine appeal process, to have cases reviewed, that you risk 60% of applications being marked as wrong. 60% of the children on Christmas Island tonight who will come to Australia will never get given a visa under this legislation. It doesn't matter how compromising or willing we are to try and move on and give people some form of a temporary visa or a CHEV. The reality is, the statistics tell us, past history and evidence shows us, that if this assessment process is changed the way the minister wants it, 60% of those children are never going to even be given a temporary protection visa. This minister is not just a sociopath, not just a grabber of power for himself who is prepared to take everything and use children to get it, but he has sold senators in this place who are trying to do the right thing a lie. Sociopaths are masters and deceivers and manipulators. Well, that's what we've seen here tonight, colleagues. That is exactly what we've seen here tonight. I heard Mr Palmer earlier today saying that he had won family reunion as part of this deal. I've looked through the legislation, I've looked through the amendments. There ain't no family reunion in here. We heard that people would be able to have a pathway to permanency. Well, it's not in there. And it won't be in there for the majority of people who we have apparently must do this for to get them off the island. Why didn't the minister act to get those children out of detention when he was told that the conditions were damaging them months ago? Why has he spent months attacking Gillian Triggs for standing up and saying these kids needed to be off the island and out of detention? Why didn't he act then? Because he was desperate to keep his chips in his pocket for exactly this occasion. Who would have been on the end of that phone call, distressed, crying, if he'd already taken all the children out? I am appalled. Many people in this country tonight would be appalled. Using children as hostages is never okay, and only a sociopath would do it.